It really has been an extraordinary week in global affairs. Davos, Donald Trump threatening sanctions tariff sanctions against countries that didn't support the US desire to take over sovereignty on Greenland, Iceland, large, small piece of ice, depending on which of his descriptions you were listening to. And the European Union getting some collective spine and saying, not that going to happen. And then he says, we're not going to use force. And then he says, there's a deal. We don't know what that deal looks like. It might involve the rights to the minerals for the Americans. It might, we are being told by some reports, allow the Americans to establish more bases, which they are allowed to do under the current convention governing Greenland, but then to have sovereignty over that small geographical area where the base is, pretty much like the British have sovereignty over military bases on Cyprus. But we just don't know. And then there was the big announcement about the Board of Peace, the Board of Action, and then today the focus has been on ending the Russia-Ukraine war and Vladimir Zelensky leaving Davos saying, we are close to an agreement. I've got the security guarantees I want. The Russians haven't commented on that. What the Russians have said is that there's no deal until and unless Ukrainian soldiers leave the Donbass region. And we've got the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Americans having trilateral talks in UAE. It takes your breath away, Yossi Mekelberg. I don't know what to think.
Good afternoon, John. The one thing is sure with the Trump administration, there is no dull moment. And for better and many times for worse. And the pace of developments always takes us by surprise, and you wonder, is this part of his tactic to deal with the world, or that's the way he operates? Whatever comes to his mind, wherever he discusses with his advisors, then the next day comes a policy, and then even the reversing this policy, as we see to a certain extent with Greenland. Now, at the end of the day, the real test would be by results. If he managed to achieve what he wants, and at the same time, also, as we saw the case of Greenland, the case of many European countries and others from the West not joining the Board of Peace, if there is a way to push back and avoid some of what he tries to inflict.
It seems to me the Board of Peace, I don't have a huge amount of belief that is going to make a significant difference and work with or work against or take over the work of the United Nations. It's a Trump vanity project, and I think that in 10 years' time we'll be looking back at it as nothing more than that. So perhaps the most significant developments, potentially, is around a Russia-Ukraine deal. Do you get a sense from what you've heard and reading between the lines of what you've heard and what you haven't heard, that we might actually be close to an agreement which might be sustained?
Again, with Trump is always to try to decipher or differentiate between the noise, which is all about vanity. Is they say, I don't get the Nobel Peace Prize, I'm not interested in peace anymore, but then he pushes actually to peace between or an agreement, a deal between Russia and Ukraine. So, yes, it's about him, and at the same time, I think the fact that there are negotiations right now taking place in the UAE, and what we heard from Zelensky, President Zelensky yesterday, that there is readiness there to compromise. So I think the onus now is actually on Moscow and Putin, whether things are happening behind the scenes, and the fact that they're ready to do it so publicly suggests that there is some progress there, which is much needed. We see the constant of drones and missiles on Ukraine. So I think the sides are getting closer to a deal.
And I mean, it must be awful living in Kiev at the moment because of the cold, absolutely freezing cold, and the Russians have knocked out most of the heating infrastructure. So yeah, people literally can't go to the toilet because the water in their cistern is frozen, and so on.
Okay.
The issue of the Donbass might well be the final sticking point. So part of Donetsk and part of Luhansk, and what the Ukrainians are proposing is this demilitarized free economic zone. That's not something that the Russians have shown any interest in taking on board seriously. And where's the compromise here? Where's the breakthrough on this? And just about everybody I'm reading is saying this is the final, really serious sticking point before peace.
Yeah, and this is a very major sticking point. We know in all peace agreements there is always this last part that is the most difficult, and both sides feel that if they give up, they ended, with possibly being accused of making too many concession, almost defeated, justifying why the other side took the steps they took along this war. So in these cases, the most important thing, we saw it, for instance, in the peace between Egypt and Israel back in 78 on a small place called Taba. We saw it in Bosnia in 1995 with a place called Burj. It's so important, A, for the mediator to push both sides to the finish line. The other thing, to find a formula in which both sides can claim that it's exactly what they wanted, or at least they are not feel defeated or humiliated by that. But I think it's always this last percent of negotiation that prove the most difficult because of fear of what the opposition will say at home and how you can justify all the sacrifice while you're making this concession. And hence, it's so important that the mediator will push them to make something, but a formula that other side will be satisfied.
Professor Yossi Mekelberg, International Relations Analyst, thank you for your insights.